Hello and welcome to Deck Ideas. In this video, I will walk you through my thought process for brewing a Zimone and Dina commander deck. First things first, let's break down the commander. Commanders? Zimone and Dina, 3 mana, black, green, and blue, legendary human dryad, a 3/4, nothing crazy yet, but I already love an efficiently costed commander with access to 3 colors. Their first ability isn't the most relevant, incidental life gain is a nice upside, but this ability is much more relevant, I think, to formats where 2 life is 10% of your starting life total, not 5%. It's their second ability that really jumps off the card. For the cost of tapping this creature and sacrificing another, an ability is activated that says, draw a card, drop a land, tapped, and if you have 8 or more lands, do this again. I want to emphasize the importance of knowing where your colon is. The colon is after the words sacrifice a creature. That means sacrificing is part of the cost. And if you repeat the ability due to having 8 or more lands, you don't have to sacrifice a second creature. You already paid the cost. This is a complicated ability, but it clearly wants creatures to sacrifice and lands to play, which brings us to this deck's starting point. A great starting point for any Zimone and Dina deck is looking for cards with when a land enters the battlefield, aka landfall triggers that create creature tokens. Scute Swarm is 1, very cute, and 2, the standard bearer for creature making landfall triggers. It is a total steal at 3 mana. If it were 5 mana, it would still be almost strictly better than Spore Mound. Granted, a 1/1, but a 1/1 that eventually starts copying itself for extra landfall triggers. There are many more words on green sleeves here, but most relevant are that when we drop a land, they make a badger. And while much less good than Scute Swarm, Spore Mound is still very good and very much in my deck. These cards did not make the cut for the current version of my deck, but I just began playtesting, and I'm not claiming to be a perfect deck builder or to have nailed the balance between different categories of cards. I mean, I wound up going in a combo direction, but if you wanted something stompier, Baloths and Avenger are great mid-game bombs. All else being equal, if there are redundant effects for the same exact mana cost, where one is a creature and the other is an enchantment, usually I go with the enchantment because there are fewer removal spells and board wipes that affect them. They're generally more resilient than creatures, but in this deck, I actually run a handful of creature tutors, so I am prioritizing creatures, therefore Spore Mound over Zendikar's Royal. With Zimone and Dina in play, beside any landfall creature token generator, we are just 1 card away from some very bonkers synergy. The 2 most core synergies with Zimone and Dina are Retreat to Coralhelm and Intruder Alarm. If we tap Zimone and Dina, sacrifice a landfall created token, and put a land onto the battlefield with Retreat to Coralhelm in play, its landfall trigger allows us to untap Z and D. Our landfall token maker also triggers, probably Scute Swarm, and from there we can use Z and D's ability again, and again, and again, as many times as we have lands in hand. And because the ability draws us a card, sometimes 2 cards, it's possible to chain multiple of these activations together. Similarly, with Intruder Alarm in play, if dropping a land with Zimone and Dina's activated ability triggers a token maker, Intruder Alarm will trigger when that token enters, untapping Z and D for another activation. It's another way to do basically the same thing. These synergies already ooze value, accelerating our mana and drawing us cards, but they're actually just 1 piece away from representing a true infinite combo. There are 3 so-called bounce lands in our colors. They tap for 2 mana each, but require us to return a land to our hand when they enter play. They do not say another land, however, and we are allowed to have them target themselves. That means if, for example, we put a Simic Growth Chamber into play with Zimone and Dina's ability, and have a Scute Swarm and Retreat to Coralhelm in play, we can draw our entire deck. When Growth Chamber enters the battlefield, it triggers, Coralhelm triggers, and Scute Swarm triggers. No matter how we stack those triggers, we'll wind up with an Insect token, an Untap trigger for Z and D, and a Bounce trigger by the Growth Chamber for the Growth Chamber. We can then activate Z and D again and repeat the whole process infinitely, netting 1 card, possibly 2, every time. One rules note here: if we control 8 or more lands as Zimone and Dina's ability is resolving, remember that when an ability has begun resolving, that entire ability will resolve before the game processes triggers put on the stack during that ability's resolution. That means if Zimone and Dina's ability does indeed, quote, repeat this process when we play the Simic Growth Chamber, the Growth Chamber's bounce trigger will not resolve before Z and D give us the opportunity to put another land into play. We activate Z and D, sacrifice a Scute Swarm token, draw a card, and put Simic Growth Chamber into play. This will put its bounce trigger, a Retreat to Coral Helm trigger, and a Scute Swarm trigger on the stack, but we cannot begin processing those triggers until Z and D's ability finishes. First, we have to, quote, repeat this process once, meaning that we go back to the colon and draw a card and put a land into play from our hand, if we have one. This will also trigger Swarm and Coral Helm, but at this point, Z and D's ability is done, so we would process those triggers. They are on top of the stack, and then the triggers put on the stack previously. That's a very long way to basically say, don't try to use the same bounce land twice during a single Zimone and Dina ability resolution. The combination of effects like Amulet of Vigor and Freed from the Real can be used in place of Retreat to Coral Helm or Intruder Alarm. If Freed from the Real enchants Zimone and Dina, when Simic Growth Chamber enters, we can stack triggers from Amulet and Growth Chamber so that the land untaps before bouncing itself. If we tap for mana in response to the bounce trigger, we net 1 green and can untap Z and D with the blue by activating Freed from the Real. Once again, we can repeat this infinitely. Also, with an Amulet effect in play, Oboro Palace in the Clouds is essentially a 4th bounce land that we can use for this Zimone and Dina combo. What's more is that there are many cards that can serve as redundancy for either Amulet of Vigor or Freed from the Real. Redundant Amulet of Vigor effects include Tiller Engine, basically Amulet but with legs, Lotus Cobra, which doesn't untap anything but generates blue mana for Freed from the Real even from tapped bounce lands, Tireless Provisioner, who creates a treasure token, which in this context is just 1 blue mana with extra steps, and Stone Cedar Hierophant, which is borderline clunky at 4 mana, but eventually becomes another way to continually untap a bounce land in this combo. Redundant Freed from the Real effects include Pemin's Aura, so named because it turns any creature into Morphling, and Morphling was nicknamed Superman in his heyday, and if you reorder the letters in Pemin's Aura, it spells I am Superman. There's your fun magic fact of the day. Also, the ability to grant Shroud to Z and D is excellent. Immobilizing Ink requires a discard in addition to 1 mana, so while we're still able to draw our deck, we aren't netting any cards unless we have 8 lands and Z and D are drawing us 2 cards. That's fine though. We're still choosing which cards to keep and should usually be able to convert this into a winning hand. And Aura of Dominion works because our landfall token generators will create new untapped tokens every time we run through the loop. No matter which iteration of our Zimone and Dina loop gets going, our ultimate win condition will usually be one of these cards. Thassa's Oracle and Laboratory Maniac have literal win the game abilities for when we have drawn our entire deck, and Concordant Crossroads is good for situations where, say, we have multiple creature generating landfall triggers and we manage to make infinite creatures. With haste, infinite creatures is just a win condition. It's worth noting that another infinite combo has been hiding in plain sight among cards that we've already looked at. If Simic Growth Chamber is in play and Stone Cedar Hierophant is enchanted with Freed from the Real, we can tap Chamber to generate green-blue, untap it by tapping Stone Cedar, untap Stone Cedar with the blue mana, and repeat infinitely, netting 1 green mana each time. In addition to bounce lands, Lotus Field and Lotus Veil enable similar Freed from the Real combos, and Creature somehow creates multiple mana, including at least 1 blue, is a concept that we can repeat many times throughout our deck with cards that are also great all on their own. Here it is with Arbor Elf and a Triome that taps for 2 thanks to Utopia Sprawl. Wild Growth, Fertile Ground, and Wolf Willow Haven also work to enable this same basic combo concept. Bloom Tender works all by itself. Kiora's Follower works. Voyaging Satyr works. And Argothian Elder and Ley Weaver also combo with Freed from the real effects as long as we control more than 2 lands, one of which taps for blue, which will pretty much always be the case. Also, though, this deck seems like a good place to include one of my pet favorite pieces of tech with creatures that can tap to untap 2 or more lands. And that is Maze of Ith. Now, this only works during combat, but say we attack with Argothian Elder. We can now target Elder with Maze of Ith because it's an attacking creature. We untap them, and because Maze simply prevents damage to and from that creature, but does not explicitly remove it from combat, the game continues to consider Elder to be an attacking creature. That means we can tap the Elder to untap Maze and any other land, then tap Maze, targeting Elder again, representing an infinite loop. This one's weird because, again, it can only happen during combat, but it's a combo that can easily squeeze into many decks. If we're running infinite mana combos, we obviously need sinks for that infinite mana once we have it. Staff of Domination can sometimes be a combo piece all by itself with like an Argothian Elder and both of the Lotus lands here, but it's more commonly just going to be a sink for infinite mana that gains us infinite life and lets us draw our entire deck. And Capsize is a super flexible piece of interaction that doubles as a mana sink because of its buyback ability. With infinite mana, we can use this to bounce all of our opponent's permanents to their hands, including their lands, which constitutes a pretty hard lock on the game that they will almost certainly scoop to. And any deck that is this combo focused should have a thorough suite of tutors. We'll often draw into 1 or 2 combo pieces organically, and then can use a tutor to find our final game-winning piece. Mono black tutors that let us search for any card are obviously the most flexible, but I'm also running a handful of more card-type specific tutors. Mystical Tutor will often just grab us another better tutor, which is a bit of a daisy chain, but it's still very strong. And all of this deck's combos involve creatures, so creature tutors are a must. Neoform and Eldritch Evolution allow us to tutor creature combo pieces directly into play, and usually the sacrifice a creature requirement isn't an issue. And land tutors are also important because we need to reliably grab bounce lands for our Zimone and Dina combos. Counterspells are important for protecting whatever combos we're trying to pull off. There's nothing super groundbreaking here, just some of my favorite mana-efficient counterspells. I will say this build is admittedly light on interaction, and that's a conscious choice on my part. I would guess that in most metagames, this deck would win more consistently by trimming some of the combo pieces in favor for more interaction. But from a video making standpoint, I think combos are more unique and interesting, and featuring more of them will spark more deck ideas for y'all, the viewers, than just like listing commander staples that you've already heard of. Speaking of commander staples, I am running 7 1-mana dorks like Birds of Paradise. More interestingly though, I'm also running Instill Energy and Nature's Chosen, which allow me to untap an enchanted creature for free once during my turn. I can put these on a mana dork to double the mana that they make every turn, or of course, I can enchant Zimone and Dina to activate their ability an additional time each turn. It's not a combo, but for 1 mana, that is great value. That leaves us with 2 more non-land cards that just don't fit neatly into any other bucket I have labeled for this deck. As usual, I don't know where to put Lightning Greaves. It's important to protect our commander, especially in such a commander-centric deck, but it is a singularly unique effect in this and so many other commander decks. And Tatyova Benthic Druid is the only card in the 99 here explicitly for card draw. I mean, this build leans much more heavily on tutors, and it draws cards with our commander itself. But, you know, in a deck designed to chain landfall triggers together, it's just so good. I couldn't leave out Tatyova. She's really good. And finally, this deck runs 38 lands, 27 of which are good but boilerplate mana producers. I'm not going to talk about them. And 7 of which I've already covered, which leaves 4 more to talk about. Cavern of Souls and Command Beacon both evidence how much we are relying on Zimone and Dina. I mean, Cavern makes them uncounterable, and Beacon allows us to recast them for 3 mana Dina, no matter how many times our opponents have, probably wisely, removed them from the battlefield. Field of the Dead doesn't come online until the middle or late game, but it's another token-generating landfall effect that can help us combo with Zimone and Dina. And Minamo, School at Water's Edge, allows us to untap Z and D and use their ability an additional time. Never a bad option. So that's the deck, but I do have a few honorable mentions. Tide Force Elemental, Nadir Kraken, and Moloku the Clouded Mirror are budget-friendly cards that can be combo pieces with Zimone and Dina. They were late cuts for me, but are very worthy of consideration. Also, exploration-style effects that grant additional land drops each turn were actually the first kind of effect that I did an advanced search for on scryfall.com when brewing this deck. A more land-heavy build is definitely possible. If I had gone in that direction, I would probably be running like closer to 50 lands. But in this very combo-focused build, I found through goldfishing that these effects were kind of redundant in a superfluous way with Zimone and Dina, so I cut them in favor of combo support and more traditional ramp effects. Here is the full deck list. There's also a link in the description to this deck on moxfield.com. Feel free to pause the video if you want to linger on this list for a moment, but without further ado, let's head over to Moxfield and goldfish through some example hands. All right, here we are goldfishing. Let's take a look at this opening hand. The first thing I tend to look for is, do I have any mana acceleration? I do. Bloom Tender. Bloom Tender does go infinite in so many different ways, and we have a Demonic Tutor to maybe fetch up that Freed from the Real, or Pemin's Aura, Pact of Negation to back up whatever we ultimately try to do, and a Spore Mound, a little bit slow, but it's a landfall token generator that can go off with Zimone and Dina. So yeah, I'm gonna have a hard time justifying mulliganing here. I'm gonna keep this hand. Let's go to turn one. I will draw. We got another tutor. You love to see it. Field of the Dead comes into play tapped. Let's just get that out of the way. Okay, turn two. I will draw. Okay, Expedition Map is good to see. That can help us get our bounce lands. I will play this Forest, I guess. I'll play Bloom Tender, and that's going to be turn two. Okay, turn three. Next turn. Command Tower. Nice to see ya. I'll put a Command Tower into play. And okay, this gets weird with Bloom Tender though, because I actually can't put Zimone and Dina into play just yet. I only have green permanents. I can play the Expedition Map. I think I probably should. Let's put that into play. I have 3 mana left, and it costs 2 to activate the Expedition Map. Do I want to tutor yet? I do have 2 tutors, so maybe I go ahead and just use one of them now. Bloom Tender, Command Tower. I'll cast a Demonic Tutor. Seeing no counter spells, I will view my library. The piece that I am missing is either Retreat to Coral Helm or Intruder Alarm. I love the idea of Intruder Alarm with the Bloom Tender also, so let's go ahead and fetch that up. This goes to my hand. I do not have to reveal it. My opponents do not know that I have an Intruder Alarm. I will close and shuffle, although they know that I don't think they're assuming I got something that's not scary, right? Next turn, draw a Bayou. Yeah, it's nice to see, actually. We're a little hard-pressed for colors right now. I'll put the Bayou into play. And from here, yeah, the play is certainly going to be green, black, blue. I will cast Zimone and Dina. And now Bloom Tender taps for 3 mana, black, green, blue. I have 4 mana total available, although I do not have the ability to make black, black. So the Grim Tutor is not going to be played right now. I could drop the Intruder Alarm. I can't really activate it yet, though. So, although if we're playing against opponents, if they play a creature, that would untap my Bloom Tender. We can assume that someone will probably play a creature, and then I could crack my Expedition Map anyway. But I don't have an opponent. My Goldfish has no magic cards, so I'll just use the Bloom Tender outright, crack the Expedition Map, put this in graveyard, view my library. Let's get Simic Growth Chamber, yes. So I will reveal this and put it into my hand. I will close and shuffle, and then I will go to my next turn. Untap. There is a Llanowar Elves. Would have been nicer on turn 1, but it's fine on turn, what is this, 4 or 5? 5, turn 5. Wait. I have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana. So 7, 6, 5, 4 mana with Intruder Alarm. Oh, but then I can play the Llanowar Elves, which will untap the Bloom Tender and be mana positive. Okay, this is kind of cool. I'm going to say for 1, 2, 3, I will play an Intruder Alarm. Okay. Then I will tap Bloom Tender for black, green, blue. I will use the green, leaving a blue-black floating, to cast Llanowar Elves. That'll trigger Intruder Alarm. Untap all creatures, including my Bloom Tender. So I have 2 mana floating, 3, 4, 5. I will play a Spore Mound, which will trigger Intruder Alarm. I will untap my Bloom Tender. I will activate Zimone and Dina. Okay, first things first, I will sacrifice another creature. Llanowar Elves, you're gone. I will draw a card. So I'll put this into my hand. It's a crop rotation. That's nice to see. Would have gotten our bounce land anyway. I may put a land card from my hand onto the battlefield tapped. It will be a Simic Growth Chamber. That will trigger my Spore Mound. It will trigger itself. I will add a token. What does it make? Saproling. Saproling is made. Simic Growth Chamber bounces itself. When Saproling enters, I get to untap my Zimone and Dina. I also can float some mana with Bloom Tender. And from here, right, I get to draw my deck. I can tap Zimone and Dina, sacrifice another creature, we'll sacrifice the Saproling, I will draw a card, I will put a card from my hand, a land from my hand into play tapped. It will be a Simic Growth Chamber, that will trigger Spore Mound, I will create a token, it is a Saproling, that will trigger Intruder Alarm, I will untap Zimone and Dina, Simic Growth Chamber, targets itself, goes back to my hand, and I do it again. Every time I do that, my board will look like this. I'm also netting more and more and more mana with Bloom Tender, so I can basically just, you know, if no one's going to interrupt me, I draw my deck, I draw my deck, I draw my deck, and there's a Thassa's Oracle. So yeah, I'm going to draw my deck, and I will win the game. And I have a Pact of Negation to say no to any opponents who try to say no to me. Looking at this hand, it's hard to say no to a hand with enough lands and a Soul Ring, not to mention like Greensleeves and a Lotus Cobra. I mean, this could be a problem of having all the mana in the world and nothing to do with it. But again, I just can't justify getting rid of a hand with this much early game potential. So let's say turn 1, we're going to draw Golgari Rot Farm. It's nice to see a bounce land, honestly, because that is kind of a combo piece. We'll lead off with a Command Tower. I will tap the Command Tower for a Soul Ring, and I will move to my next turn. Okay, keep drawing lands. Tap Soul Ring, Command Tower, drop a Lotus Cobra. I have 1 colorless floating. Underground Sea, make a mana, but that's still, I mean, it's 3 mana, but it needs to be 3, it needs to be black, blue, green, and I have colorless. We'll just go to my next turn. Another land. What do you know? I just play a Watery Grave tapped, and that'll trigger landfall, and I'll make a green, and I'll make a black, and I'll make a blue, and that'll be a Zimone and Dina. And I'll go to my next turn. Oh, look, we drew another land. Okay, all right, new game. Taking a look at this hand, it looks pretty good. It looks actually very good. We have Pemin's Aura, which is a combo piece, Instill Energy, which can go right onto our Elves of Deep Shadow, and of course a Demonic Tutor to fetch up whatever we might be missing. This looks like, and Lotus Veil is a combo piece that goes with Pemin's Aura. Yeah, this looks like it could be hot and spicy. I will draw for turn 1. It is a Concordant Crossroads. Nice to see, I guess. I'll play a Verdant Catacombs. I will tap crack and get it down to 39. Not that I really have to keep track of my life when I'm gold fishing, but you know. And what is it that I want? I probably want something that makes blue and a green. So that is, what do you call that? That's a Tropical Island. Tropical Island will come into play. We'll close and shuffle. I'll tap the Tropical Island. I will play an Elves of Deep Shadow, and I will go to turn 2. Drawing a Boreal Druid. That's good. That's very good. I have to choose basically between Instill Energy and Boreal Druid. I would love it if like Elves of Deep Shadow were just a Llanowar Elves, because then I could put Instill Energy on it and then untap it and then tap it to play my 1-drop mana dork here. But that's not what we're working with. So instead, I mean, the play might just be dropping the Boreal Druid and forgetting the Instill Energy for a moment. I don't have a way to play Zimone and Dina right now, I don't believe. So I'm just going to play a swamp, and for a green, I will play the Boreal Druid, and then for the sake of using all of my mana, do I already want to use a Demonic Tutor? Yeah, I think I will tap these and play the Demonic Tutor. It's going to be something that untaps our Lotus Veil, which will be, I mean, I don't know, Kiora's Follower seems, well, actually kind of awkward to play. How can I make a blue into green? It's going to be Voyaging Satyr for sure. We'll close and shuffle, and I'll go to my next turn. Hopefully I don't get so flooded. Okay, Immobilizing Ink. There's a card that is not a land and actually does stuff for us. So you'll love to see it. Now, Lotus Veil requires me to sacrifice 2 untapped lands. So if I played Lotus Veil, sacrifice these lands, tap it for green, 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 I can play Voyaging Satyr, I can play Concordant Crossroads, and then I can tap the Voyaging Satyr to untap the Lotus Veil, and then I can put Instill Energy on the Voyaging Satyr. Okay, yeah, here's a line. Lotus Veil comes into play. I will sacrifice my Tropical Island and Swamp as per its come into play ability, enter the battlefield ability. Then for green, 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 I will use 2 of that on a Voyaging Satyr and 1 of that on Concordant Crossroads. I guess I could have probably used Boreal Druid, but whatever. Then I will tap Voyaging Satyr to untap the Lotus Veil, tap Lotus Veil for green, green, green once again. I will put an Instill Energy on this Voyaging Satyr, which lets me untap it once this turn. And because it has haste from the Concordant Crossroads, I can tap it to untap Lotus Veil. I still have green, green floating. And then if I do blue, blue, blue with Lotus Veil, if I do blue, blue, blue with my Lotus Veil here, I can then add a colorless, leaving a blue floating, and put Pemin's Aura on the Voyaging Satyr, right? Then I have a blue left over, and I can untap the Voyaging Satyr. Then I can tap the Voyaging Satyr to untap the Lotus Veil, and this represents infinite mana of all colors. So I can make infinite blue first, and then I can make infinite of whatever I want off of the Lotus Veil. So my board will ultimately look like this with infinite mana of all colors. I will play Zimone and Dina. And then what is it that Immobilizing Ink requires us to do? We have to discard a card whenever we use it. And I also have to sacrifice creatures, although I'm more than okay sacrificing my Boreal Druid and Elves of Deep Shadow since I have infinite mana. I'm going to go ahead and just activate Zimone and Dina. I will sacrifice the Boreal Druid. I will draw a card. Exotic Orchard. Okay, that's not too bad because I can put a land card from my hand onto the battlefield tapped, although I guess it doesn't matter since I have infinite mana of all colors. And actually, you know what? Because my Immobilizing Ink wants me to discard cards, I'm going to go ahead and leave the Exotic Orchard in my hand. That's the end of Zimone and Dina's ability. But I can then enchant Zimone and Dina with Immobilizing Ink, and I can use 1 of my infinite mana and discarding this Exotic Orchard to untap them. I can then do it again. So I'll tap them. I will sacrifice Elves of Deep Shadow. I will draw a card, Nurturing Peatland. Maybe I do put this into, okay, I do put this into play tapped because I still have infinite mana, so I can use Voyaging Satyr to untap it and then do this. And then I can crack the Nurturing Peatland to draw a card. Oh, it's a Vampiric Tutor. Okay. So this just means we win the game next turn. I mean, assuming that our opponents have absolutely no interaction, which is a dumb assumption to make. If you actually build this deck and play it, you should probably, like I said, run more interaction effects and slow your roll. But the point of this is to just show you like the bonkers potential of what this can do. When goldfishing, I'm doing this like on turn 3, turn 4, easy. If you slow that down and try to go off turn 5, turn 6, turn 7, you can have you're gonna have a good time. You're gonna have a good time. You're gonna have a good time. Hopefully this video had some useful tidbits that will help you to have as much fun as friends and cardboard can provide. If you enjoyed it, please do all of the standard YouTube things. Click the like button, click subscribe, click the bell to get notifications, and maybe send a link on over to somebody in your playgroup who already enjoys YouTube content about Commander because they're more likely to watch all of these because they already like this sort of thing. If you want to see more videos like these, spreading the word is just the single best thing you can do to help make that happen, help support the channel, help make me go like, oh, hey, maybe this is a thing I can do. Thanks for watching, and as always, remember, you cannot lose the game if you never pass priority.